We have to sell the lake house, Mom. It's the only way. My son Leo's voice was a carefully rehearsed symphony of concern and regret, but his eyes held the glint of a predator cornering its prey. I lay in the sterile white bed of the rehabilitation center. The dull ache in my rebuilt hip, a constant throbbing reminder of the car accident that had stolen the last 3 months of my life. Outside, the New Hampshire landscape was bursting with autumn color, a world of beauty I could only see through a triple-paned window. He placed a thick stack of papers and a pen on my bedside table, next to the untouched cup of lukewarm tea. The medical bills are extensive, he continued, gesturing vaguely. This accident, the surgeries, the rehab, it's more than your insurance will cover. This is the only way to ensure you get the best care without liquidating your retirement funds. His wife, Isabel, glided to his side, placing a manicured hand on his shoulder. She was dressed in expensive white linen, looking less like a concerned visitor and more like a high priestess of a very exclusive wellness cult. What Leo is saying, Catherine, she cooed, her voice smooth as coconut oil, is that this is an act of love. By releasing the heavy energy of that big, empty house, you're creating space for healing and for financial abundance. Financial abundance. For them. I was a retired investigative journalist. For 30 years, my entire career was built on seeing the truth hiding behind well-rehearsed lies. I could see it now, clear as day. Leo's desperation, his failed tech startups a quiet shame between us for years. Isabel's insatiable appetite for the lifestyle she promoted to her online followers. They didn't see a sick mother. They saw a solution to their problems. The papers, I said, my voice raspy. What are they? Just standard stuff, Leo said quickly, flipping to a page with a yellow Sign Here tab. It gives me temporary authority to manage your finances and handle the property sale while you're recovering. Fiduciary responsibility. It's all to protect you. The words swam before my eyes, a blur of legalese I was too exhausted, too fogged by painkillers to fully decipher. I looked at my son, at the boy I had taught to ride a bike and bait a fishing hook on the very dock of the house he now wanted to sell. The house my late husband, David, and I had bought with the first big check from his tech startup, the place we had called our sanctuary. A lifetime of trust warred with the screaming alarms in my head, but the pain in my hip flared, sharp and blinding, and in that moment of weakness, my exhaustion won. My hand, the one that still ached from the crash, trembled as I signed where he pointed. They left soon after, their relief palpable. You did the right thing, Mom, Leo said, kissing my forehead. Now you can just focus on getting better. I lay there for an hour, the silence of the room pressing in on me, a heavy blanket of dread. Then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached for the simple burner phone I kept in my nightstand for emergencies, a holdover from my reporting days. I dialed my oldest friend, my neighbor at the lake, Mrs. Gable. Evelyn? I said, my voice shaking. It's Catherine. I just need to ask you something. Is everything quiet at the house? There was a pause, then her voice, brittle with age and concern. Oh, Catherine, dear, I didn't want to be the one to tell you. I thought you knew. Knew what, Evelyn? A young man was here this morning, from a real estate agency. He put a sign on your lawn, right by the water. She hesitated. It's a beautiful sign. Big, glossy letters. It says, "Price to sell." The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. Price to sell. He hadn't even waited a day. I lay back against the pillows, the physical pain from my hip dulling in comparison to the searing agony of this betrayal. My son and his wife had just signed my future away, believing I was a helpless victim trapped in this rehabilitation center. They thought my story was over. What they didn't know is that my quiet compliance was not defeat. It was the beginning of my counterattack. If this story of a son's shocking greed and a mother's hidden strength has captured your attention. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. What secrets are hidden in my late husband's portfolio that my children know nothing about? And how will a retired investigative journalist use her old skills to deliver a lesson her family will never forget? The real story has just begun. For the next 48 hours, I became the best actress of my career. The rage and clarity I felt after Evelyn's call were packed away, stored deep inside me like a coiled spring. On the surface, I presented my children with the woman they expected to see, a heartbroken, confused, and utterly defeated mother. When Leo and Isabel visited the next day, their faces were alight with a predatory excitement they poorly disguised as cheerful news. "Mom, you won't believe it. We already have an offer on the house," Leo announced, pulling a chair up to my bedside. "A cash offer, well above asking. The market is just perfect right now. It's a sign." I watched him from my pillows, letting my eyes well up with convincing tears. I watched him the way I used to watch a corrupt city councilman at a press conference, noting the tells, the micro-expressions of greed that flickered behind his mask of concern. He didn't see my pain. He saw a problem being efficiently solved. Isabel patted my hand, her rings cold against my skin. "This is a positive manifestation, Catherine. The universe is telling us this is the right path. The funds from the sale will not only cover the best care here, but will provide the seed money for our new wellness tech venture. It's a win-win." My own house, sold to fund her next pyramid scheme. I let out a small, broken sound. "Just, please make sure my rose bushes are cared for," I whispered, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek. "David planted the yellow one for our anniversary." It was the perfect line. It was sentimental, weak. It was exactly what they wanted to hear. It confirmed their narrative that I was a woman lost in the past, incapable of making decisions for my future. "Of course, Mom," Leo said, his relief almost palpable. "We'll take care of everything." They left, convinced they had won. I wiped the tear from my face, my expression hardening the moment the door clicked shut. They were so busy congratulating themselves, they never stopped to ask a single practical question. They never wondered why, for a retired journalist, I had such a sophisticated financial trust. They never wondered why my late husband, a man who had made his fortune in the unpredictable world of tech, would have left his estate without ironclad protections. They saw a frail old woman, and it made them careless. That night, I waited. I watched the clock on the wall, its slow, steady tick a countdown. I listened to the nurse's footsteps fade as the midnight shift change settled into a quiet rhythm. When the hallway outside my room had been silent for a full hour, I moved. Slowly, painfully, I reached for the burner phone hidden in the bottom of my toiletries bag. A small piece of spycraft a friendly physical therapist had procured for me after hearing me complain about the hospital's terrible reception. I pressed the single number on speed dial. It rang twice before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. "George." "Catherine," he replied, his voice instantly alert. "I've been waiting for your call. How are you?" "They're selling the lake house, George," I said, my voice low and urgent, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "They had me sign the papers." There was a pause, a heavy silence filled with 40 years of shared history and trust. "I see," he said finally. He didn't offer sympathy. He knew that wasn't what I was calling for. I was calling for action. "It's time to open the retirement file," I said, using the code phrase we'd created with the lawyers after David died. A file for a day we hoped would never come. "I was afraid of this," George said, his voice grim. "The trust documents are in my office safe. The 2-key protocol is active. They won't be able to touch the main portfolio without me. Are you sure you want to proceed this way?" "They've left me no choice," I whispered. "They believe I'm broken, George. They're about to find out how wrong they are." I'm on it, Kath. Consider the file opened. I ended the call and tucked the phone away. A profound sense of calm washed over me, displacing the rage and the grief. The call was made. The first and most important domino had been pushed. My children were celebrating their victory, unaware that they were merely actors in a play written for them long ago. All I had to do now was lie here, in this sterile white room, and let them think they were winning. For the first time since the accident, I felt a flicker of my old self returning. The fog of pain and grief began to recede, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of a journalist on a case. I was no longer just a patient in room 3B. I was the lead investigator, and my own life was the story. My first dispatch from the field came 2 days later, not in a phone call, but in a discreet email from George that appeared on the tablet a friendly nurse had smuggled in for me. The subject line was innocuous. Thoughts on the manuscript. The body was brief and coded, just as we had practiced in the old days when working on sensitive stories. Subject I has a documented history, it read. Similar business models in Arizona and Florida, a pattern of targeting investors for seed money that vanishes. Multiple lawsuits, all settled out of court. Am digging deeper into the paper trail. Stay safe. G. Isabel wasn't just an amateur manipulator. She was a professional. My son hadn't just fallen in love. He had been targeted. The knowledge didn't bring me more pain, only a grim sense of confirmation. It hardened my resolve. This wasn't just about my money anymore. It was about stopping her before she could ruin another life. My own investigation was far more personal. Each morning, after the nurses had made their rounds, I would log into my banking portal. The interface, once a mundane tool for paying bills, had become my primary source of intelligence. I watched as the money from the sale of my lake house, my sanctuary, appeared in my checking account. A staggering sum that made my heart ache. And then, just as I knew he would, Leo began to move it. He was clever. I had to give him that. He didn't transfer it all at once. The withdrawals came in smaller, carefully calculated chunks, all just under the $50,000 threshold that would require a second signature from George. I watched the transactions like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. $49,500 to a newly registered LLC named Elysian Wellness Tech. Another $30,000 to a consulting firm I'd never heard of. $45,000 for brand development and marketing. He was draining the account, but more importantly, he was creating a perfect, undeniable digital paper trail of his own volition. Every maternal instinct screamed at me to call him, to tell him to stop before he dug himself any deeper. But the journalist in me knew better. You never interrupt a source when they're in the middle of a confession. And every one of those transfers was a confession, a signed admission of his complicity. With a steady hand, I took a screenshot of every transaction, every account number, every date, and emailed them to a secure, encrypted address George had set up for me. I was building my case, one withdrawal at a time. Leo called me that Friday, his voice brimming with an artificial manic energy. Mom, it's all happening. We just signed the lease on an office space in the city. The energy is incredible. Isabel is a genius. She's already lining up brand partnerships. This is it, the big one. All thanks to you. That's wonderful, dear, I said, my voice a weak, trembling whisper. I let him talk for 10 minutes about his grand plans, his vision, the bright future he was building with my money. He never once asked how my physical therapy was going. He never asked if I was in pain. His world had shrunk to the size of his own ambition. I'm so glad I could help, I murmured before hanging up, my heart a block of ice in my chest. He thought he was building his dream. He had no idea he was just building my case against him. That evening, I reviewed the file I was creating. George's damning research on Isabel's past. My meticulous logs of Leo's financial transfers. It was all there, a neat, orderly narrative of greed and deception. They thought they had all the power, that their victory was complete. They couldn't feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. They were so dazzled by the sight of the money, they failed to see the trap closing around them. The evidence was secure. The first move had been made. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to make their last, fatal mistake, reaching for the prize they could never have. The first few weeks after the house sale were a whirlwind of activity, none of it mine. The money from my home, my beautiful lake house, was being spent with a speed that was breathtaking. Through my secret online portal, I watched it all. A 5-year lease on a ridiculously expensive office space in downtown Boston. A fleet of new laptops and ergonomic chairs. A catered launch party where Isabel posed for photos, champagne glass in hand, celebrating a company that had yet to produce a single product. They were playing house with my life's savings, building a fantasy on a foundation of betrayal. I continued to screenshot every expense, every transfer. The file was getting thicker. I knew it was coming. They had burned through the initial funds from the house sale faster than I'd anticipated. To launch their wellness app, they needed the real money, the serious capital locked away in the Maine Vance Family Trust, the formidable portfolio my late husband David had so brilliantly built. The call came from George on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of a session with my physical therapist, learning to walk again without a cane, when my burner phone vibrated silently in my robe pocket. I excused myself, feigning a need for water. "It's happened." George's voice was grim, but I could hear the undercurrent of satisfaction. "He tried to move $3 million this morning." I leaned against the cool wall of the hallway, my heart steady. And the firm followed protocol. They flagged the unusual amount and the new destination account. They called me for the second authorization, as per the trust's bylaws. "I imagine Leo wasn't happy about that," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. George chuckled, a dry rustling sound. "That's the understatement of the century. The bank manager said he was apoplectic, screaming that his mother was the sole beneficiary and demanding to know who the hell I was. When they told him I was the legally required co-signer on any withdrawal over $50,000, there was apparently a long, stunned silence. The trap had been sprung. For 10 years, that two-key protocol had been a silent guardian, a legal tripwire David and I had put in place for this very reason. We'd told the children it was a complex estate planning tool to minimize taxes, a lie they had readily accepted without ever bothering to read the fine print. "He knows now," I said quietly. "He knows that he can't touch the money without me," George corrected. "He doesn't know why. He called me directly 10 minutes ago. I've never been spoken to like that in my life. He accused me of being a parasite, an old relic trying to control his family's money. He demanded I meet him and sign the papers immediately." "What did you say?" "I told him I'd be happy to meet," George said, and I could picture his predatory smile. As long as his mother was present and gave her explicit in-person consent, that seemed to confuse him. Of course it did. In his mind, I was a non-entity, a rubber stamp. The idea that I would have any say in the matter was completely foreign to him. The call from Leo to my official hospital phone came less than an hour later. It was the frantic, panicked call of a man whose world had just been turned upside down. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, foregoing any pretense of gentle concern. "Something is seriously wrong with the trust accounts. They won't release the funds for the startup. They keep talking about George Anderson, Dad's old editor. Why is his name on our family trust? What did you do?" I let a long pause hang in the air, then summoned the voice of a confused, slightly frightened old woman. "George? Oh dear, that can't be right. George just helped your father with some research for his book. There must be some kind of mistake, some old paperwork." "A mistake? Mom, he's a co-signer. He has to approve everything. He's holding our entire future hostage," he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. I don't understand, Leo," I stammered, injecting a note of pathetic helplessness into my voice. "This is all so complicated. Your father handled everything. Maybe you should talk to George? I'm sure you can sort it out. Sort it out? He wants you there. He's insisting on a meeting with you present. Oh dear, I said, letting out a shaky sigh. Whatever you think is best, Leo. You know I trust you to handle these things. He hung up with a groan of pure frustration. I placed the phone back on the receiver, my hand perfectly steady. He still didn't see it. He was a storm of rage, searching for someone to blame, and I had just handed him the perfect target. George. He would march into that meeting armed with righteous indignation, ready to bully an old man into signing a piece of paper. He had no idea that he wasn't marching into a negotiation. He was marching into a reckoning. George arranged the meeting at his lawyer's office downtown. A cold, impersonal conference room on the 40th floor, all glass and chrome, with a panoramic view of the Boston skyline. It was neutral territory, but it felt like George's territory. It was a place of power, and my son was about to find out it wasn't his. I was brought in from the rehab center, still using my walker for effect, playing the part of the frail mother being brought in to rubber stamp her own financial ruin. I sat quietly at the head of the long table while George sat to my right, his worn leather briefcase in front of him. Leo and Isabel arrived 10 minutes late, a deliberate power move. Leo strode in, all confidence and tailored charisma. Isabel floated in behind him, a vision in cream-colored silk, her expression one of serene, benevolent concern. They were a perfect, predatory team. "Mom, you're looking better," Leo said, kissing the air near my cheek before turning his full attention to George. He didn't even wait for Isabel to sit down. "George, let's cut to the chase," he began, sliding a folder of his own across the polished table. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but it ends today. These are the transfer authorizations. My mother is here to give her consent, and you will provide your signature. We're on a tight deadline." George didn't even glance at the papers. He just looked at me. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The time for acting was over. "No, Leo," I said. My voice was no longer the weak, trembling whisper he was used to. It was clear, steady, and amplified by the room's cold acoustics. "I will not be giving my consent." Leo froze, his hand hovering over the folder. He stared at me as if I'd just started speaking in a foreign language. Isabel's serene smile flickered. "Catherine, dear," she began, her voice like honey laced with poison. "I think the stress of all this might be confusing you." "The only thing I'm confused about, Isabel," I interrupted, turning my full attention to her, "is which of your last names you prefer I use. Is it Sterling? Or should I call you Ms. Gable from your time in Arizona? Or perhaps Ms. Cortez? The authorities in Florida were quite interested in her whereabouts after that little holistic investment fund of hers disappeared, along with $500,000 of other people's money." The color drained from Isabel's face. The mask of serene wellness evaporated, revealing the raw, cornered panic of a lifelong con artist. Leo looked back and forth between us, his expression a frantic mess of confusion and dawning horror. What is this? Mom, what are you talking about?" "Your mother is talking about due diligence, Leo," George said, finally speaking. He opened his own briefcase and pulled out a thick, meticulously organized file, placing it in the center of the table. "While you've been busy liquidating your mother's assets, I've been doing what I do best. A little investigative journalism." He looked directly at Isabel. 3 failed multi-level marketing schemes, a trail of bankruptcies, multiple lawsuits for fraud, all quietly settled. You have a remarkable talent for finding lonely, vulnerable people and convincing them to invest in their own ruin. And Leo here was your masterpiece. "These are lies," Isabel shrieked, her voice losing its breathy calm. "She's a bitter old woman. She's trying to poison you against me, Leo." "Am I?" I asked softly. "Am I the one who convinced you to drain the accounts your father and I set up for you? Am I the one who told you to sell the one place that held every good memory this family has?" Leo was speechless, looking at his wife as if for the first time. The confident facade he had built his life on was crumbling in real time. "It's all circumstantial," Isabel spat, regaining a sliver of her composure. "You have no proof. No one will believe a word you say." George leaned back in his chair and a small, cold smile touched his lips. "You see, that's the wonderful thing about the truth, Isabel. It doesn't require belief when it has sources." He pulled his phone from his pocket and placed it on the table. "For 30 years, I was an editor. I know how to build a case, and I've spent the last 3 weeks talking to your sources. So many of them. The retired couple in Phoenix who lost their retirement fund. The young woman in Miami who is still paying off the loans she took out for your transcendental coaching program. They've all been incredibly happy to go on the record." He tapped his phone. "They'll be featured in tomorrow's episode of my podcast, The Paper Trail. It already has over 2 million subscribers. The episode is called The Wellness Guru Who Preys on the Weak." He pressed play. A woman's tearful voice filled the silent conference room. "Her name was Isabel Sterling then. She promised me financial freedom. I lost everything." George stopped the recording. That was the moment they truly broke. Isabel let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob, her face a mask of pure terror. Leo looked as if he'd been physically struck. He stared at his wife, then at me, then at the damning evidence on the table. The full, catastrophic scope of his foolishness, his greed, his betrayal, washed over him all at once. I stood up slowly, my walker forgotten. I was no longer the frail patient. I was the investigative journalist who had just delivered the killing blow to her story. "You wanted to sell my house to fund a company, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but cutting. "But you never once thought to investigate your own business partner. I taught you better than that." I turned and walked toward the door, George and Ava following. We left them there, in that cold, silent room, surrounded by the wreckage of their lies. The confrontation was over. The truth was out, and the silence they were left with was their final, crushing judgment. The ride back to the rehabilitation center was silent. There was nothing left to say. George drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while I stared out the window at the city lights blurring past. There is no joy in such a victory, only a profound, aching sadness for the relationships that had to be incinerated in order to save them from a worse fate. I had exposed my son to the truth, but in doing so, I had also exposed him to public ruin. It was a necessary cruelty, a kind of maternal surgery performed without anesthesia, and my own heart ached from the incision. George's podcast episode, The Wellness Guru Who Preys on the Weak, went live at 6 a.m. the next morning. I didn't listen to it. I didn't need to. By noon, the fallout had already begun to ripple through the digital world. George forwarded me an email containing a link to a Boston Globe article. Prominent wellness influencer accused of fraud by investigative podcast. Isabel's carefully curated empire of positive affirmations and overpriced supplements began to crumble in a matter of hours. Her social media accounts were flooded with comments from other victims, a chorus of angry voices rising from the past. By evening, her Instagram, her TikTok, her entire online presence had been deleted. She had vanished into the digital ether, a ghost haunted by the lives she had ruined. George later told me a class action lawsuit was being filed against her by a dozen of the victims featured in his podcast. The money from my lake house, which was sitting in her and Leo's corporate account, was immediately frozen by a court injunction. They couldn't touch a single dime. The consequences for Leo were less public, but in his world, just as devastating. His name was tied to Isabel's. His face had been in the background of her photos. His name listed as CEO of her fraudulent company. His reputation in Boston's small, insular tech community was destroyed overnight. The few legitimate investors he had been courting sent terse emails severing all ties. He was a pariah. For 3 days, I heard nothing from him. I focused on my physical therapy, on the slow, arduous work of teaching my muscles to obey my commands again. Each step I took without the walker felt like a small victory, a reclamation of my own body, my own life. I was healing, while the life my son had tried to build on a foundation of lies was collapsing. The call I knew would come finally did, not to my phone, but as a voicemail left late on the third night. I listened to it alone in the dark, the quiet beeping of a heart monitor in the hallway the only other sound. His voice was almost unrecognizable. The arrogant, confident tone was gone, replaced by something broken and hollow. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking. There was a long pause. I saw the articles. I heard the podcast. She's gone. Cleared out the apartment while I was out. Took her things and just disappeared." Another ragged breath. "The money's frozen. The investors are gone. Everything is gone. You were right. You were right about everything." The message ended there. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a request for help. It was the sound of a man hitting rock bottom, the raw, unfiltered confession of a soul that had lost its way completely. My first instinct, the deep, primal instinct of a mother, was to call him back, to tell him to come to me, to promise I would fix it. But I held back. My hand hovered over the phone, my thumb tracing the cool glass screen, but I did not press the button. Fixing it was what had gotten us here in the first place. My lifetime of fixing his mistakes, cushioning his falls, had created the very weakness that Isabel had so expertly exploited. The hardest act of love, I was learning, was to do nothing, to let him sit with the consequences of his choices, to let him feel the full, crushing weight of his own rock bottom. The next morning, my doctor came into the room, a bright smile on his face. "Catherine," he said, looking at my chart, "your progress is astonishing. You're a fighter. I see no reason why we can't start planning your discharge for the end of the week." Discharge. The word felt foreign. For months, this room had been my world, my sanctuary, my war room. The thought of leaving it was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Where will you go?" he asked gently. I looked out the window at the clear blue sky. The house was sold. The money was a legal battleground. My family was in ruins. I had nothing but the trust fund my husband had so wisely protected. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't anger or grief. It was a quiet, fragile sense of freedom. The storm I had unleashed had finally passed. Now came the difficult work of surveying the damage and seeing what, if anything, could be rebuilt from the wreckage. 1 year later. That's how long it took for the legal dust to settle, for the echoes of the storm to finally fade. I didn't return to the rehab center after my discharge. Instead, I moved into a quiet, furnished apartment in the city that George helped me find. From there, I directed the war that followed. The class action lawsuit against Isabel was swift and brutal. Faced with overwhelming evidence from George's podcast and my financial records, she settled, leaving her bankrupt and a pariah in the wellness community she had worked so hard to swindle. She disappeared, becoming just another cautionary tale. The money from the sale of my lake house was eventually returned to my trust, minus legal fees. The first thing I did was buy my house back. The young couple who had purchased it were surprisingly understanding once their lawyers explained the fraudulent circumstances of the sale. Walking back through that front door was a victory unlike any other. It wasn't just a house. It was my life, reclaimed. I spent the spring and summer healing, not just my body, but my soul. I replanted the rose bushes. I sat on the dock where I had taught Leo to fish, and I thought about my life, my son, and the future. The rage had subsided, leaving behind a vast, quiet space for clarity. I realized my work wasn't finished. David's legacy and my own couldn't just be about protecting money. It had to be about creating something meaningful from the wreckage. With George's help, I used a significant portion of the trust to establish the Hayes Foundation for Ethical Journalism. a nonprofit dedicated to funding young, independent journalists who were working to expose the very kind of fraud I had experienced. My pain was being repurposed into a shield for others. It was the most fitting tribute to my career and to the husband who had always believed in the power of the truth. I didn't hear from Leo for almost a year. There were no more desperate voicemails, no angry texts, just a vast, unbroken silence. I didn't reach out. I knew, with a certainty that was both painful and necessary, that this was a journey he had to make alone. He showed up on a crisp October afternoon. I was on the porch reading when his modest second-hand sedan pulled into the driveway. It was so different from the flashy sports car he used to drive that I barely recognized it. He stepped out, looking thinner, older. He wasn't wearing a designer suit, just a simple flannel shirt and jeans. The arrogant, desperate energy was gone, replaced by a quiet, hesitant humility. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, not assuming he was welcome. "Mom?" he said, his voice quiet. "Leo," I replied, closing my book. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I'm sorry it took so long," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "There was a lot to sort out." He took a tentative step up. "My therapist says I spent my whole life seeing you as a safety net, not as a person. She was right. I'm sorry, Mom, not just for the money." "I'm sorry for not seeing you." The apology was simple, honest, and stripped of all manipulation. It was the apology I had waited a lifetime to hear. "Where have you been, Leo?" I asked, gesturing to the chair opposite me. He sat, his hands resting awkwardly on his knees. "I got a job," he said. "Teaching computer skills at a community center. It doesn't pay much. I have a small apartment in the city. After the settlement, after Isabel, there was nothing left. I had to start over. For real this time." We talked for hours, for the first time not as a mother and her dependent son, but as two adults. He told me about the shame, the therapy, the difficult work of untangling his own sense of entitlement. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for money. He just talked, and I just listened. Before he left, as the sun began to set over the lake, painting the water in shades of orange and gold, he turned to me. "What you did with the podcast, the trust, it was brutal, Mom. It destroyed my life." He paused, and I held my breath. "And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Thank you." He had to lose an inheritance to finally find his own worth, and I had to lose the son I thought I had, to finally meet the man he was always meant to become. Our relationship isn't what it was. It's quieter, more honest, built on the hard-earned bedrock of truth instead of the shifting sands of obligation and denial. It's better. Sometimes I look out at the lake, its surface calm and clear, and I think about the storms it can withstand. Our family was a storm, but we survived. The legacy my husband and I truly wanted to leave behind wasn't in a trust fund. It was in the strength to weather those storms and the wisdom to find peace in the calm that follows. And in that, finally, we had succeeded. Catherine's story is a powerful testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound act of love a parent can show is not to provide a safety net, but to remove it completely. Her son, Leo, was trapped in a cycle of entitlement, believing his mother's legacy was simply a fund to fuel his ambitions. He failed to see that the real inheritance his parents wanted to give him was strength of character, not the contents of a bank account. By setting an unbreakable boundary, a financial fortress built on foresight and trust, Catherine didn't just protect her assets, she forced her son to confront the man he had become. His painful journey to rock bottom was the only path to building a life of genuine self-worth and true financial independence. This is a gripping cautionary tale that shows how entitlement corrodes the soul, while resilience and integrity build a legacy that no amount of money can buy. The journalism foundation Catherine built became the true inheritance, one of purpose rather than possessions, transforming her personal pain into a public good. This story makes us ask difficult questions about our own families and the values we pass on. What does it truly mean to set someone up for success? Share your thoughts on this complex family drama in the comments below. If you appreciate stories about karma, justice, and the hard-won fight for what's right, please like, share, and subscribe for more. May you always find the strength to protect your own legacy, whatever that may be.